Oh, hello, I didn't see you come in. Welcome to this week's edition of Proletarian Poetry. Revolutionary poetry made simple so everyone can understand. I'm your host, Alec McFarlane, and this week we will be diving into a poem titled A Woman's Execution by Richard King. Let's begin.
What you must do first is read the poem and annotate whatever you think would give you clues as to what the speaker is, or the audience, or just the general meaning or purpose of the poem. So let's begin with that. And so here's a list of the words that I picked out while reading the poem. We start in the first stanza with sweet-breathed and young. Simply, it just describes what our narrator looks like. She's young, and the daughter actually tells us that the narrator is female, so we have a young woman. And I picked out slaughter because, well, it tells us what is about to happen to our narrator. She's being led to the slaughter. Now for the second stanza, we have friends, which could mean either... It could either mean that she is actually directly talking to her comrades that are about to be executed with her, or more likely she is ironically referring to the soldiers that are about to execute her. Liberty's darling, in the third stanza, I see it as more of a metaphor to show that the author is trying to point out that this young woman is a symbol of liberty, and that killing her would be as similar to killing liberty if it was an actual thing. The statement, Marie's my name, we now know the narrator's name is Marie. Christ's mother bore it. This is, I believe, the author attempting to allude that the narrator is similar to Christ, and there's a lot of evidence for that later in the poem, and I've also pointed that out too. Moving right along. Limbs like a Venus, in the first stanza, tells us not only that the narrator is young, but she's very beautiful. And I believe the author is attempting to present that she is very innocent. Like, you know how we associate some beauty and prettiness as something as being more innocent than something that is ugly or evil. So, again, same stanza, soldiers, she's referring, this one is directly referring to her execution, there's no question about it. And then in the sixth stanza, we are introduced that she is about to be executed alongside her lover, Jean. We see the author, of course, is trying to propose that this revolution was both romantic in the sense that they talk about their lovers as they're about to be executed. And it also shows that by themselves being executed side by side, that the revolution represented more equality between these two sexes, that the men and the women are being executed side by side, even in death they're standing side by side. The last thing I picked out in the eighth stanza is, well, of course, Viva la Commune, it's a side, it's Marie, it's probably her last words, and it's the cheer of the Paris Commune. And it shows the reader that these people had pride and excitement in the revolution that they partaked in. And they're even proud of it, and they don't regret any of the decision, even when they're staring death directly in the face. To simplify everything that we've just gone over, I've separated each of the things that I've annotated into three sort of categories. We have the speaker, the audience, and the purpose. Speaker, we obviously have the young woman named Marie. She's free-thinking and independent and proud of what she's done, and does not fear death, as you can tell by her excited tone and prideful nature through her narrative. Audience, again, we have the soldiers that are about to execute her. She is directly addressing them. That's why she's so prideful. She's sort of mocking them. And, of course, her comrades, particularly her lover, Jean, who she mentions for an entire stanza and a half, basically. And, again, these are both important parts of this. The purpose is up to interpretation of what you believe and what I believe. So these purposes are the real sort of things that you want to use for anything on the AP literature exam, for anything of the poetry question. This is what you kind of want to use, the purpose of the poem. And so I've sort of taken a couple things, and I'll explain each one, why I chose to use them. The first one I said emphasize the utility of trying to crush a revolution. I used mainly my sort of source from this was that you have this narrator, Marie. She's being walked to the wall where they're about to execute her. And she's still very excited. In almost every single stanza, you have it end in an exclamation point, or at least there'd be an exclamation mark somewhere in there. She's very happy and prideful of what she's done. And this sort of represents, I'm sure people have heard the term, you can kill a man but you can't kill an idea. This is what the author is trying to represent, that even though you're killing this one individual, the ideas that she fought for live on. And so that's what you could go into detail with that sort of purpose. The second one I said was present the narrator as a Christ-like figure to show the ultimate purity and goodness of the people involved in the revolution. And so I took from this, she references that she's named after the mother of Christ, and this shows that her family was most likely religious, and since this is France, most likely Catholic. And not only do you have this sort of battle going on between the revolutionaries and the soldiers that ends with Marie's execution, you also have this sort of internal idea battle. Like in France especially, you have this, ever since the French Revolution, historical lesson here, right? You have this sort of battle between the Catholic Church and free-thinking individuals. And in this revolution here, you have the author representing this as saying that Marie is coming from a very religious family, but she has become independent and free-thinking by joining this revolution, that she now represents that revolution's ideas over her religious past. But that does not mean that she is any less sort of Christ-like. The author is trying to say here that you do not have to be particularly religious to be associated with Christ, because if a lot of things like this, the revolutionary styles try to say that Christ was more revolutionary than he was a conservative because he believed in giving wealth to the poor, things like that, that the author's associating Christ not in the sort of religious Bible term, but what he did in his life. And so you get that sort of there, and you have a lot of references. She's very prideful. She's being basically sacrificed. She's being executed just like Christ. There's a lot of connections here that you can sort of go through your head, and this would also be a great one to do on an AP literature exam. And another one we get mostly from her talking of Jean and their sort of relationship. It's to demonstrate the equality and power brought to marginalized people during the revolution. The Paris Commune came around in 1871. You can imagine what it was like for women back then in any sort of country. There are very few that really truly respected women. And so we have here with her talking of Jean and them both being lined up side by side, about to be executed, as a sort of nod to the equality brought on by a revolution. You have Jean and Marie standing side by side. They're not being executed separately. I mean, they're not being kept separately. They're together, and they're very much in love. This also demonstrates the sort of romantic qualities that authors try to portray in a revolution. You get that with a lot of sort of stories like that, where they focus in on the sort of romantic ideals of a revolution rather than the actual outcome. And you have here that both Jean and Marie fought side by side. They both gave their lives for this revolution, so why should they be treated any differently when they're about to die? It's just a sort of nod to that. So yeah, with this, we can move on directly now to constructing our thesis statement with these types of purposes, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so right now I have constructed a thesis from the information that we've gathered earlier, and so I'm going to read that to you and then go through my thought process while making this thesis. In Edward King's A Woman's Execution, the author controversially presents his narrator, Marie as a Christ-like figure by drawing comparisons between their deaths and seemingly selfless actions during life. Having Marie be both a revolutionary and share similarities with Christ is meant to challenge the well-accepted idea that revolution, being a harbinger of progress, and religion, being a bastion of tradition, must always be at odds. Alright, and so you see I've underlined a couple of things. These are some of the main stuff that you want to plug in. I say plug in because theses are mainly formulas. If you think about it that way, it makes it a lot easier. And so you have that beginning bit that almost every thesis is going to have it in the author's name and title of the poem or book or whatever it is. You then fill in the formula afterwards. And so, first thing I had to underline, controversially, you always want to have a sort of really eye-catching adjective that you want to, or adverb that you want to be very big and catch the eye of the reader who's grading your paper. And so I chose controversially for reasons I'll later explain. Then you want the main idea that you're trying to present, that you've taken from the work of the author, the main idea that you're just taking from the work, and that is Marie is a Christ-like figure. And you give examples that you've chosen from the work. I say their deaths, and that they both are executed for the seemingly selfless action. They're both executed, and you have the seemingly selfless actions during life. Those are just two examples. You can probably find more if you read back through the poem once more. And then you get to the wider idea that you've drawn from it. The author is presenting that Mary is Christ-like, but what are you drawing from it? And so I said that you have that it's meant to challenge an idea that at this time, most people who were revolutionaries were not religious, and most people who were religious were not revolutionaries. It was not a common occurrence in that because religion, as I say in here, was a bastion of tradition, it represented holding on to beliefs and traditions of the past, while revolutionaries wanted new ideas, the new ideas of the day coming forward, and they wanted to get them in right then and there. And so you have what is considered by many a natural battle between revolutionaries and religion, and you have the narrator being a revolutionary who is very Christ-like, and the narrator again is trying to say that, the author is trying to say that you do not need to be religious to be similar to Christ. If you actually read things in the Bible, you read that he was very egalitarian in some of the things that he did. That's what the revolutionaries of the day were. Very egalitarian. And so the author wanted to present Marie as this sort of pure Christ-like innocent figure being executed to show that, even to challenge the idea that, again, as I say in the bottom, revolution is always against religion, and religion is always against revolution. So yeah, there's the major thesis statement. You could have gone with anything. I could have given you an example of the sort of going directly into the narrative and saying the prideful thing, and prideful and excited, and talk about how that affects the reader and what the message that's trying to convey. But in all honesty, that's about all you need for the thesis. So thank you very much, and goodbye.